You may remember a couple of months ago when Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland declared victory over inflation. Well, Stats Canada says the inflation rate has risen to 4%. The Bank of Canada much prefers to see inflation between 2 to 3%. Now, to chat about inflation in a little more detail and how it's impacting us here in Canada is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, what is driving inflation? And please tell me that we won't see another rate increase from the Bank of Canada.
Well, maybe we'll get to that in a minute because that could happen. It's nothing important is really driving inflation. It's just gas, your home costs, and your food. So, as long as you can do without those, you're going to be just fine in the current economy. Gas was not up by that much, 0.8%, but if you look at the price of gas across much of the country now, we're not as blessed as you in Alberta with much lower prices. It is continuing to increase. So we're probably going to see gas go up even more. Shelter costs continue to go up, and not just mortgage costs, but rent costs dramatically. But how on food, it's coming down. Remember, food inflation used to be at 9 to almost 10%. Last month, it was 8.5%, 6.9%. That's still a big increase. And then you look at certain elements, and I believe chicken's at about 9% increase over the previous year, beef 11.9%, coffee and tea in that 9% range as well, cereal products. So, basically your breakfast and your dinner is going to cost you an awful lot more over what it cost a year ago. And a year ago, it cost a lot more than the year before. So we have been having compound inflation go on for some time now on the very basic necessities that Canadians rely on. Chrystia Freeland said that her plan was working back in July when Stats Canada announced that inflation had dropped to 2.8%. That was just because the price of gas had dropped dramatically from where it had been a year before. That's all it was. They knew it, but they tried to claim victory. They tried to say it was their policies. It wasn't. If they're going to take credit for what happened back then I guess they would have to take blame for this now, because between June's inflation rate and August that just came out today, that's a 43% increase in inflation. Is she willing to say that her plan's still working? I doubt it.
And let's talk a bit about housing costs now here, Brian. You and I chatted a bit about it before. My principal, interest, and tax, I just renewed on my mortgage. I went 2.79 to 5.09. I'm paying an extra $300 a month PIT. But that's nothing compared to people in Vancouver and Toronto renewing, and they've got million-dollar mortgages. Some people they can't handle it. They're just walking away from their homes. Now, rents are also increasing across the country, including a 6.5% hike here in Alberta. Brian, will we actually see more pressure on housing costs soon?
I think that we will. And by the way, if you got 5.09, you got a good rate, and lots of people are going to be jealous of the rate that you got. People are struggling. We haven't seen such a dramatic increase in interest rates, I don't think ever. Yes, we have seen higher, absolutely. And my parents will tell you about dealing with 18% interest rates back in the early 80s. But This was a very quick spike. The Bank of Canada, in their most recent decision earlier this month, said, no, we're going to pause. We're not going to do an interest rate. And remember, 3 premiers, British Columbia's David Eby, Newfoundland and Labrador's Andrew Furey, and Ontario's Doug Ford had all written to Bank Governor Tiff Macklem saying, look, you're hurting people. You can't do this. Well, Macklem and the bank paused in September, but I believe it's October 25th is their next rate decision. Macklem's already hinted that they are going to consider more increases if inflation keeps up. So, well, today we have inflation at 4%. Home heating time is about to kick in. Down in Atlantic Canada, they have not had the carbon tax on home heating fuels yet. They've just started to get the carbon tax that much of the rest of the country's been dealing with. So they're getting it on their home heating fuels. They're also getting the clean fuel standards. That's going to drive up costs. Gas is increasing. Food inflation is still not under control, although that is a good sign that it's coming down. So I think that we're going to see higher inflation again when the new numbers are announced in a month, and that happens just before the Bank of Canada has their next interest rate hike. So yes, we're going to see more pressure on bank interest rates, which will drive up mortgage costs. And the StatsCan today, in their report, said that all of this is helping drive up rents. So even if you're renting, it's having an impact on your housing costs. It's very difficult for everyone involved, Hal.
Brian, Parliament resumed, and a shocking statement came from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He told the House that Canadian security officials believe agents of the government of India murdered a Sikh leader in British Columbia, Hardeep Singh Najjar, a Canadian on Canadian soil earlier this year. Now, what is Ottawa doing about this violation of Canadian sovereignty?
Well, the Prime Minister heads to the United Nations this week, and we can expect that that's going to be a discussion. He apparently raised this issue not only with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi when he was at the G20, but also with Joe Biden, with Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, and other allies. He went to them and said, "This is a problem. This is the intelligence that my officials have given me." Modi denied everything, and that was part of their heated exchange. You saw it was a very tense moment. We thought it was just about trade and about India's concerns about the Khalistani separatist movement growing in Canada. We now know that it was about more than that. So I think we're going to continue to see this at the United Nations. Canada's in a difficult spot, though. The United States and the UK are full steam ahead at trying to get trade deals with India. That isn't very important for their economy. They're unlikely to be making public statements that will hurt their ambitions. So we might be without many allies, at least many vocal allies, when it comes to dealing with this. We've kicked out a top Indian diplomat from Ottawa, told them to get packing. In retaliation, the Modi government expelled a Canadian diplomat. And so the war of words continues. The Modi government, of course, they have said that all of this is false and that Canada harbors extremists and terrorists inside our borders.
Now, Hardeep Singh Najjar was not without controversy, the man who was killed, Brian. India, like you said, had labeled him a terrorist. Why were we harboring a terrorist? And what can you tell us about Mr. Najjar?
Mr. Najjar is someone who came to Canada in 1997. He arrived without documentation and declared asylum. He was rejected on that. Then he married a Canadian citizen. That, from the reporting that I've seen, was rejected as a marriage of convenience. But Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did describe him as a Canadian citizen yesterday. So at some point, he did become a Canadian citizen. He lived in Surrey, British Columbia. He was the leader at his local gurdwara or temple and ran a plumbing business. He maintained that he was not a terrorist, that he was involved in Sikh nationalist politics, advocating for a Sikh homeland in Punjab, but denied he was a terrorist. The Indian government linked him to a number of incidents, including incidents involving explosives, the targeted killing, they said, of a Hindu priest, various other incidents, all of which Najjar denied. But there are reports of him running training camps in Mission, British Columbia for people who wanted to go and fight for an independent Sikh homeland in the Punjab region of India. So, this is a man who obviously was not without controversy, as you say, not without some questionable tactics, but that doesn't, even if he was guilty of terrorist acts, that does not give India permission to conduct extrajudicial killings on Canadian soil. We convict terrorists. We try them in court in this country. We don't assassinate them. So if India is guilty, then this amounts to an assassination. Now, I want to point out, if you remember the 2008 Mumbai terrorist attacks, it was horrific events. There was a Canadian who was accused and later convicted of having a role in that. India, he was sent to jail in the United States. India is currently trying to extradite him from the United States. There was an Ottawa university professor who was extradited to France on similar charges. This is how we deal with it, not through targeted killing. So whether it was the Indian government or somebody else, this is political violence come to Canada. And we've had too much of it related to this attempt at a Sikh homeland. The Air India bombing, attempted murders and assassinations in Vancouver, the attacks on people like Ujjal Dosanjh, who spoke out against this movement. Over and over again, we have had extremists and terrorists inside our borders. We need to say no more.
Brian, we've chatted about the polls before. You and I both know that they can change on a dime in an instant here. Many times polls are influenced by major events. Is this type of event, what happened with Najjar, something that maybe Canadians will rally around Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his Liberal Party?
Quite possibly. The old saying is, what are you afraid of? Was the question to British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. And he said, events, dear boy, events. This is the type of event that could rally people to support Trudeau. His trip to India was looking disastrous, and it was disastrous. But will people say, well, there's a good reason it was disastrous. India's killing Canadian citizens. We've got to back Trudeau. There's obviously going to be some of that from within his own party. Does this resonate for Canadians outside of the Indian diaspora? Is this something that's going to move the polls? I think we'll have to wait and see on that, but it's definitely possible. And Trudeau will definitely use this. It's a serious issue, but politicians are politicians. And he will use his reaction to this to try and shore up support, especially in the Sikh community. Largest Sikh population in the world outside of Punjab is in Canada.
Brian, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is coming to Canada later this week. Speaking of a lot of different ethnicities in Canada, we know we have a lot of Ukrainians here in Alberta. You say it looks like the Prime Minister will try and use the Zelensky visit to boost his support in the Ukrainian community?
That's what it's appearing like at this point. Zelensky's going to go to the United States, then he's scheduled to go to Ottawa. Early rumblings are that he will speak to Parliament on Friday and then fly to Toronto for a rally with the rather large Ukrainian community here as well. So it's just at this point, trying to get a sense of how this is being played out. My understanding is the Prime Minister's office is keeping it very tight. At this point, other politicians not really being given an invite to share the stage with Zelensky. If you remember, there was a rally for Ukraine a few months ago. At that one, Pierre Poilievre did show up. Justin Trudeau was there. Ontario Premier Doug Ford spoke. By the sounds of it, and we'll see if this changes over the coming days, they're trying to keep it a Trudeau-Zelensky show. Whether it stays that way or the Ukrainian community says, no, you've got to open up the rally wider, we'll have to wait and see.
Now, speaking of rallies, Brian, there are plans for rallies across Canada this Wednesday for the 1 Million March for Kids. Now, we had a chance here at Bridge City News to chat with one of the main organizers of the event, Dr. Bahira Abdul Salam, who says for her, it's really about leave our kids alone and giving parents more rights in schools. There are also counter-protests being organized in some cases by the leaders of major public sector unions.
Yeah, that's right. The video leaked online. You can find it on Twitter or x.com as it is now. And the language and the rhetoric coming from these union leaders is over the top. Now, I understand there can be over the top rhetoric from some of the people that support the march as well. But mostly I'm hearing the message of leave our kids alone, that there are issues being pushed on kids, especially through schools that parents don't like. And we've seen the polling on that, on issues like changing of name, gender, or pronouns. Almost 80% of Canadians say, yeah, parents need to be informed. That has been described as far-right, hate-filled talking points imported from the United States. Well, no, the minority position is the one that says parents shouldn't get to know. A bunch of union leaders got together. We're talking CUPE, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, the Ontario Public Service Employees Union, I believe some others like Service Employees International were involved. A lot of big names, but as I said, mainly public sector unions. They were referring to parents who have concerns about what is being taught in school, or that that there are political agendas at play in the most heinous terms, and saying we have to counter this and there's no room for this. We're essentially advocating an end for parents having a say over how their own children are raised. I don't think that is a winning position for any union to take with its membership, with the public, and I don't think it's a winning position for politicians to take. But I can tell you that both Liberal and NDP politicians have staked out that position. I'm not sure they're going to stick to it as they see how parents and grandparents and family members across the country and across political lines react to this sort of movement.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.